Welcome to another episode of the Liberated Women podcast. I'm so excited because today I am joined by a beautiful guest who I met this year at several festivals, I believe. I went to one of her workshops at Medicine Festival. So today I have with me Samantha Rose. She is a sacred storyteller, ceremonial guide, and has been a storyteller from a young age, receiving magic and story passed down from her mother and her great-grandmother, beautiful feminine lineage coming through there. And she's performed professionally for the last 9 years at festivals, in classrooms, boardrooms, on stages, and around fires, which is where I think I probably met you the first time around. I think it was at Love Jam last year, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. Samantha is deeply passionate about receiving and sharing the stories of the earth. And today we're just going to have a conversation about, creative expression and why storytelling is so sacred and why sharing stories is so important and where it's come from. So I'm really excited for you to be here today, Samantha.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. We planned this a long time ago and we're finally here on an autumn blustery day, raining outside. So just share with me and the listeners, how you started on this journey to becoming a sacred storyteller.
I feel it started way back when I was little, and my mum would tell these incredible spontaneous stories that she would make up when we were camping or in nature or before bed, and would take my sister and I and all the other children that were there, wherever we were, into these whole different imaginal realms. And the stories felt so alive and it was so exciting. And I always wondered why my mum had so many children around her that wanted to hear what she had to say. And so I think that was it was a formative experience of really being taken into the magical world of stories and being escorted and transported to other places. And as I grew up, I was very interested in theatre and expression. But it wasn't until I was in Australia many years ago, maybe like 9 or 10 years ago now, and I guided a group on this interactive theatrical experience in nature. It was a walking story, basically, but I had no idea that's what I was doing at the time. And I took about 50 people on this immersive storytelling journey in the Australian bush. And alongside it, we had to practice, different rituals and alongside the characters of the story. And it was at the very end of that experience when the story came to a close, and it was on New Year's Eve, and we were all tying our intentions on this beautiful gum tree. And I had so many people coming up and saying, what was that? What did we just do? That was incredible. And I felt like, in a way, I stepped into the thing that my mum had offered me when I was little, and I didn't even know what it was. And I made a decision at that point because it felt so right and so inspiring and so unbelievably magical. I said, what is this craft? What is this thing? And it was then that I started discovering and exploring storytelling more. And there's not a huge community in Australia. There really isn't. But I went to the Sydney International Conference of Storytelling shortly after and dove straight in and got on the board for the next year and just went to all of the workshops and then found as many different spaces as I possibly could to share. It was like there was this force in me that was somehow unstoppable that just wanted to practice. And so I went to kids' rewilding camps and was around the fires with them, standing up and trialing out these big stories where I was getting people involved as well. They were interactive, they were fun. I was finding and seeking out open mic nights just to give myself the experience to play with it, really, and develop this language, this craft that I didn't really even know what it was. But it was a vision quest that I sat in 2018, where the questions that I brought in with what are my unique gifts and skills and talents, and how can I bridge this into the world? How can I be of service with these things? And it became evidently clear that storytelling and ceremony were at the fore. And that's when I decided to move to the UK and come and study with Martin Shaw and learn from some pretty incredible teachers. There's a lot of storytelling teachers over here and a lot of storytellers. So this was, to me, the hub of where I wanted to come and learn. 6 months turned into 4 years, and the land has wrapped its big arms around me. And I feel the ancestors as well. It's like as soon as I arrived on this land, within the first month, my dreams, it was like someone had turned a tap on in my imagination and stories were just pouring through and I almost couldn't stop. I just had journal after journal. And I even remember being in this spare room in the house that I was living in, the first house in England, and I had butcher's paper all over the walls, and one on each wall was for the different stories. And I was just trying to map out all of these images and ideas and visions and messages that I was getting. It was like being a little investigator, it was very exciting. It's just like, what is all of this meaning and what are the messages and how do I communicate them? So yeah, I was in my own little world, my own little magical world. And then I said, okay, well, it's now time for me to start sharing. And so that's how I really began, I feel like I just kind of told you the progression of my
Yeah.
journey quickly in a nutshell, but yeah, it was really from a natural impulse, a creative impulse, and a desire to want to somehow bridge that into the world. That's where it really began. Yeah.
Yeah, love that, because I also come from a kind of a theatrical background, having been a drama teacher, a performing arts teacher for so many years, and storytelling, I know it's like the thing that the students love the most when you're in that space. And when you can create lessons based around characters that they get attached to and what happens to them next and the stories, and using that imaginal realm, like even kids of age 13, 14, where they're starting to kind of detach from their imagination and be prepped for this kind of data driven exam factory. Like when they come to that classroom, they're still there, they still want to be a part of that imagination, even though it might seem a little bit uncool at that space. It's still the point where they love it. And adults, we'd see like adults absolutely love being immersed in stories as well, just from films and theater, and being taken back to that, like you said, that kind of childlike wonder that you shared, when your mum would share those stories. And even now as an adult, I remember my favorite stories as a child, and I can still recite them off by heart because that's how much they touched me as a child. And I
Yeah.
think this idea of bridging the world and using having your desires and your gifts, like you that came so clearly to you through your vision quest, and then bringing that out into the world, I think is the thing that a lot of people want to do. Like they have these gifts and they have these ideas, and I think a lot of women especially, they're such creatrixes, they're such creative forces. We are the creator, we create all the time, and yet not everybody gets to birth their creations into the world and bring them into form and use that alchemy to bridge the gap, because there's fear in the way, or there's shame or judgment or anxiety or whatever it is that stops women from bridging that. And I guess that is part of this storytelling and this creative expression, and being able to share your stories. And I was just saying to you before we got on this call that I was at an event this morning with other women, small businesses, entrepreneurs, and there were women there that started to share things, and they said, oh, I wasn't going to share this today, but it's just coming through me. And actually, when they shared, and then when they let tears flow and other things come through and express that, then other women were like, oh yeah, me too. Oh, I had a similar experience. Oh yeah, I resonate with that. And so sharing our stories actually gives permission, doesn't it, for other
Yeah.
women to share their stories and liberate their voices and their creative expression. So it's really cool that we come from that similar background, and ceremony and storytelling is so important. And I see it happening in my women's circles all the time, where we bridge that ceremony and that storytelling or that sharing in the space. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the ceremonial aspect of your storytelling, and how that then helps other people maybe to get into their creative expression.
You touched on so many really important points. Ceremony, the feeling, one of my teachers, Martin Shaw, he said that actually storytelling is a ritual, and inherent in a story is a ceremony. And I just love that a story in itself actually takes someone on a journey and brings them back again. And in that process, you separate from the ordinary reality, and there's some kind of transformation or lesson or change that happens in that journey that touches the person listening, and then they come back changed from the experience. And so actually just within a story is a ceremony. And I think my love of connection with nature, with the land, and with self, and with a deepening understanding of who we truly are, and moving the blocks in the way, meant that it felt very natural to marry the two. And so actually opening up spaces of ceremony where there are stories shared for that moment. And the way that I uniquely work with story is that I will write a story for a particular event. And I feel strange even saying write. Somehow there's something that moves through me. There's a creative energy that will collaborate with me, and that is how I like to view and experience it, because it feels like it's a collaboration, it's a partnership.
Like
I'm
you're
in
like the
partnership.
vessel that it kind of channels through, like there's something higher or kind of bigger than you that wants to use you. I mean, that's kind of like your unique gift. Like you were gifted the gift of being the vessel to bring these stories into form and then share them with the world. And I think what's really interesting, and I really believe this, and you know, words hold so much power. And when we look at etymology of words and the meaning of words, and how we use our words to cast spells, and when we're spelling and we're manifesting, because we're literally taking those words, turning them into form, and then those forms become our reality, and it changes the energy in the space, you know. And you can literally say the same group of words in different tones, and it takes on a whole new meaning in the space in a different context. That actually, you know, when we learn to use those words as spells and cast and co-create that reality, it's kind of like, wow, there's so much magic in that. And we don't even realize the spells that we've been put under with other people's words. So when you can like channel through words for an event that you feel, oh wow, like this is really good, I know this is going to be really potent and powerful for those particular people at this particular time, those people need to hear your spells, because it will stir something in them and create some kind of alchemy within them. And that's the magic for me, as I feel it.
Put. And I think what I want to say as well is that this is something that I've been deepening and practicing like a muscle, you know, over many, many years now. But I truly believe that if someone feels called to it and there's a desire to show up for this, this is something that anybody can strengthen. And it's something that I refer to as the creative wellspring that lives within each of us. We have this bubbling up infinite source of information and inspiration that at any point we can turn to and drink from. Many of us, because of the stories that we were told when we were younger, have forgotten that, or feel like we are not good at that, or we are unable to access that. And that's where the work comes in to release and clear the blocks that are in the way of that wellspring, because it doesn't, everyone has that. It's just it's our birthright. And I think that women especially, just through the portals of our wombs and our ability to create life, to me it's so potent. So it is that, like, yes, I've deepened into this and it's been my calling, absolutely. And those people that feel drawn to it, like, do it, you know, exercise the muscle. And so there's a few principles that I'll just kind of list, because I feel like it's the sacred storytelling principles that I've come to understand, which marry, you know, this ceremonial approach, this way of being in relationship to something greater than yourself. And the first one is care for self, care for each other, care for the listener, care for the story itself. And the second one is respect. If we are having a relationship with something that is more than human, something, a creative channel, our wellspring, whoever you relate to and talk to, how do we show up? What kind of relationship? And one built on respect feels like there's just instantly so much more compatibility there. Responsibility, which is what you were talking about before, is the third principle. You know, what are we spelling as sacred storytellers, as orators, as expressive artists? What are we choosing to share? And the power of planting those kinds of images with feelings and prayers into people's minds and hearts, because they grow like seeds. And you can say we see that in the opposite way in so much of the mainstream media. You know, what are the stories
Just thinking of it as you said it, I was
being told, right, that aren't
yeah.
actually responsible at all? And what is that catalyzing in the imaginations and the hearts and then the actions of people? So remembering we have an incredible responsibility as spoken word artists, and that is really exciting as well. The fourth is intention. And this is a huge catalyst for this work. I feel like if someone was just to go away with that, it's like, what is the intention that you're holding for what you want to share? And then that's the imagery and the messages and the visions that come drawn, like streaming forth, attracted to that particular intention. So I'll often tell stories that support healing. That just to me is, and I'll often get stories with lots of water or old women or shamans, these images that just come magnetized to our intentions. So that's really important too, and a huge part of the ceremonial aspect of this work. And then the final principle that has kind of come to the fore in the work that I've been doing is inspiration. How do you, how do all of us follow that small voice, the excited voice, the one that's like, oh, do that, that's magical, or I'm really curious about that, or I'm interested in that, or, when you're going through the day and something just lights you up. And likewise, following that with our imagination, not telling stories because we think other people would like it or we should do it, listening to the voice within us that is like, go there, that's really exciting, and following that. And I think that builds a real sense of inner trust with our own expression and the conversation with ourselves. So just wanted to share those principles. I feel like they're really helpful to remember when we're engaging in this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think women having the permission when you share your story and you do think about the words that you're sharing and the resonance, because like sound has resonance, right? So when we're like, oh, I really resonate with your story, I resonate with what you're saying, it's because there is resonance in the vibration and the frequency of the sound that you're creating through the power of your words.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you say it with intention, or you say it with care or with respect, using those principles, it's not the same as saying it without those things, because obviously then the resonance has a whole different frequency and vibration and the other person receives it in a whole other way. And
Yeah,
it might be like, oh, that's actually offended me, as opposed to I'm resonating with your story, or I'm being triggered by it, which is totally okay too. Like, it's good that we're triggering people in a way that they can then expand and grow. But if we came in with the intention of like, I came in with the intention to show you there's another way, or I came in with the intention to expand your mind, then we came in with the right intention. The other person will receive that in the way that they're meant to receive that, based on the stories that they've been told and they tell themselves. And I think it's like, the first principle you mentioned about care, or like self-care, I was thinking as you were speaking that like a lot of women, and it from this morning when I was in this event that I went to, I was thinking about it too. It's like the stories that women tell themselves. Like, there was one woman that shared a story that she'd been employed by a friend to help grow her business, and then all of a sudden the friend that was 1 minute promising her a raise, 5 days later said, I don't want you to work for me anymore. And this woman was taking it so personally, and we were kind of trying to support her and say, like, this is more about the other person than about you. And she was very stuck in the story that it was all about her. And of course she has to kind of work through that, but the more we tell ourselves those stories, the more we believe the stories, and start to believe the stories and the narratives that we tell ourselves, and stories and the narratives that other people tell us, if we are not kind of aware of the intention behind them and the resonance behind them. And so I think that's a really interesting point, because when it comes to creative expression, if we're telling ourselves the story of, for example, this same woman said that she was taking it personally because she feels like she's too much. And it's like, no, you're not too much. Like, she's overwhelmed by your too muchness because that's her response to it. But your too muchness is not too much. Like, and therefore, if you're telling yourself the story, well, I'm too much, therefore I have to shrink, or I have to dim myself, and that therefore I'm not good enough and I'm taking it personally. Those stories that you tell yourself don't then allow you to alchemize that into like, well, my too muchness is going to be amazing for the right people. Like, my too muchness is not enough for some people. And so with women, I think especially, like, we've been told we can't, we've been told that we're not, we need to be a certain way or fit into a certain box. And then of course there's all the silencing and the oppression and things I speak about a lot around women's liberation. I think that's where a lot of people come up against those blocks of creative expression. Or even with my partner, like, he's so talented in so many areas, but for him, he's like, well, I've been spiritually shamed all my life by my family, so I'm scared to, like, yeah, same, I made that face too. His father just made like a really sad face. I'm like, yeah. So in a way, he's like, oh, I don't really want to share my light language online because people are going to think I'm mental. Like my nan's going to make a comment or my mum's going to make a comment. And it's like, and like, and if they do, that's their trigger, not yours. Like you have a gift, like you can sing, you sing beautifully, you channel songs beautifully, you're an incredible shaman, but you're scared to what other people are going to say. And then you keep telling yourself this story that it's like, people are going to judge me because you were judged.
Yeah.
And then it stops your creative expression. So I guess obviously it happens for men too. I know we're focusing on women here, but it kind of ripples through the collective, doesn't it, in a way?
I think one of the key words that you spoke earlier in the call that feels like absolute antidote to exactly what you're talking about is permission. How do we give ourselves permission? And I think a lot on this path is continuously giving myself permission. And so that is the gift that, you know, if I could give one gift from this call, it would be give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to take up the space and to share what's really important to you and to share what's alive in your heart. And often it's as simple as that. We haven't given ourselves permission because maybe it wasn't given to us when we were little. And so it's like a really big liberating moment where we're like, I'm just going to do it because that feels good and true and alive in my heart. And what I've learned again and again and again through a lot of programs of helping people to do exactly this and guiding people on these journeys to meet the parts that are keeping them small and stuck and then stepping through that, is realizing that actually on the other side of that, we each have a very unique medicine. You could call it a frequency or a transmission or something in the words where being good enough doesn't even come into it and being smart enough doesn't even come into it. It's like what uniquely comes from your heart through your words, through your actions, and transmits directly to me is something that somehow my soul, my body, my heart really needed to hear. And I see it time and time and time and time again. And that breakthrough of like, oh, it just feels so good to share. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, it does. How natural is this that we express ourselves, that we're free, that we feel clear, that we're authentic, that we feel powerful in that. Just simply being able to say what's really alive in our heart. That
Absolutely.
in itself. And so it's interesting because, yes, I'm on this storytelling path, but the poetry and the free self-expression just to just allow something to come through your mouth that feels true, feels at the heart of it. And when we can do that, and when other people do that, we are giving each other such a gift. We're
Such a
giving
gift.
each other gifts. And so that's it. It's like, how do we give ourselves permission to share? Because it is a gift. We're not, maybe it is too much for somebody. And I know that, you know, you're speaking about your boyfriend sharing online. It's like, probably my family and my friends who I grew up with think that it's really a bit woo-woo and a bit nuts. But to me, it's like, this is important and I've got to keep doing it. And so some, you know, some people aren't going to get it and that's okay. It's like, we're never going to be able to control what someone else thinks about our work, whether we think they really like it or they don't. And what if that wasn't the point? What if it was this love of collaborating with an energy that just feels so good and so natural and wants to come through us, and the pure joy of letting our expression move out into the world, which is so healthy. It's like, it's good for us. You know, it's so when
And
I
it's
don't
good
do
for other
it,
people. It's good
it's
for
other people. So when I don't know about you, but when I don't dance or move and my body starts to get tense or I start to get really in my head and then I just go out and I'll sing or I'll speak aloud or and it's almost like, oh, thank goodness I did that. Thank
yeah.
goodness I did that. Like, whoa, it's a good reminder, you know, what are the creative practices that like stoke your fire, that help you feel more free and alive?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And I keep like this quote keeps coming through in my head. It's Maya Angelou, you know, beautiful writer who shared so much of her own story, you know, being a woman of color in a time of segregation where it's like hard enough being a woman and then it's hard enough being a woman of color and then it's like trying to actually then convince people that you are worth something and that you're educated, that you could be educated and you can be intelligent. And like in her book I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, she has a quote that's like something along the lines of there's no greater agony than a story untold. And it's
Yes.
that story sits inside of you. And
Yeah.
it's like I just shared an episode on my podcast this week that I just released about my recent trip to Jordan that I had booked for a while before the conflict broke out in the Middle East. And because I'm Jewish and half Israeli, like there was a fear around me going to the Middle East, and everyone else was telling me not to go. And I was like, no, I trust that I'm meant to be there. I'm meant to be on those lands. I'm meant to do some healing. There's a reason I'm being called here at this time. And there was a little fear in me of like, I can't really share my identity. And I didn't. I just kept saying I'm from England, even though I find it ironic that England are the ones that created all the mess over there in the first place. And it's just like knowing what I know and knowing the kind of deeper thread of what's happening underneath the surface, but then having to remain silent for 10 days because I'll be honest, like I was scared that if I shared my identity, I would be persecuted. And it was coming up to Samhain, and I was like, okay, there's the witch wound, there's the persecution, there's my lineage, there's my ancestry. I'm here to do some healing. But I kept like that part of my identity shut down for 10 days. And it felt like, I said it in my podcast, it felt like carrying around a dirty little secret inside of me. And it felt icky and it didn't feel good. And if I could have had the courage to actually share my real identity, knowing like potentially that I could have been persecuted for it, or at least like, yeah, I mean, I was there really on my own. I didn't really have anyone else around me. So there was a fear, and that it really brought up a lot for me, because I was like, well, how many people have hid their stories and hid their identities, and and how many people in my personal lineage, like in my Jewish lineage, have had to hide their identities and change their names and change themselves in order to not get persecuted. And it's the same for many other lineages too. And actually, like, there's so much magic and beauty in your ancestry and in your lineage. And I really, it was like this internal conflict I was having inside, whilst across the border there was this external conflict like manifesting. And it was such an interesting experience, and I was scared to share the story, and I really wanted to share about my time in Jordan online. And then I was like, wow, what if my family think I'm a traitor, and I've got family just across the border and I'm here. And it just felt like this whole messy kind of secret that I was carrying, and it was that agony. Like I felt it, I really felt it inside. And it took me about 3 weeks to get the courage to share it, and kind of go, well, if my family think I'm nuts and they think I'm that, well, okay, what can I do? Like,
Yeah.
that's my story, my journey. I'm different to everybody in my family, and that's the story that I choose to live. And liberating the story out loud was scary, but also really freeing. So I think like when we hold those stories inside, it is agony, because like me sharing that story will hopefully liberate someone else's story, or be like, oh yeah, I also feel some shame around that, or oh yeah, I've also hidden my identity. And even today someone messaged me and said, because I shared it with someone and I was messaging them, and they said, oh, I think I've got Jewish heritage, but they changed the names and there's been all this hidden identity. And I was like, yeah, we're in hiding. Like I've been in hiding, and it's that, like, the crossing the threshold from being in hiding to being like, no, this is who I am. You either love my energy for who I am, not because of, a government that's doing things that I don't agree with out there. It's not part of me.
Yeah.
You have to separate the two things. And it's really difficult. And there's a lot of shame coming up, and guilt, and like ickiness inside. But it's like, these are the stories. And we see those stories and those narratives playing out, and the division that these words can create in people. And what we're using storytelling for, what you're using storytelling for, and what I'm doing with my clients and my women is bringing those words back into, like, to allow people to come back into wholeness, not into division. Because it's so easy to divide people with words. We said those words have power. They cast spells. So you either cast spells that are magical and alchemical in a good way, or you use those words to cast spells that are dark and dangerous and cause people to divide and isolate them. And so I feel like words just hold so much power. And prayer and intention and ceremony, it holds so much power. There's real magic in the resonance of what we share. So that's why I'm really like excited by this topic that we're talking about, because I think
absolutely
it kind of bleeds into every part of our reality.
I'd love just to add on to what you're saying about like sharing your story and having it be heard. And we're talking about give yourself permission and just speak, do the thing that you got to do. And I think that there's a caveat here, right? Because actually we are precious, and the part of us that really wants to share is connected to, and maybe our inner child. Maybe it's a very vulnerable, creative, expressive, playful, magical part. And how do we take care of that rather than just going for it? Like, you considered a lot in your process of, how am I going to share it? Is it going to be right? What's the impact? And then, like, okay, it is right, I'm going to put it out there, which sounds really healthy. And so that's what I suggest to the people that I work with, is like, what are the safe places for you to build your confidence, to be able to stretch out into, so that you're received by people that are accepting and supportive of you and what it is that you're bringing, especially in the early days, and this is how I built my confidence up too, because a lot of us were shut down when we were little. We're told we couldn't do it, we shouldn't do it, it's not good enough, whatever. So it's like, how do we build those healthy containers around ourselves where we are now, with simply inviting a friend over for a cup of tea and saying, can I share something with you? And having a moment to do that, or going to, if you're a few steps ahead and you want to go to an open mic night just with a small group of people, and that feels like the next stage. So it's, how do we create those containers of holding so that we can safely expand, so that we don't get completely shut down again?
Absolutely.
And that's really important.
I think that's about also, I was saying this to my partner yesterday. I was like, it just takes these small increments to allow your nervous system to hold the capacity for the next evolution. So it's like, he's committed to going live online once a week, and he's like sticking to that commitment. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to build muscle memory and your body's going to start to feel safe to do that. And whoever needs to receive your words will receive your words. And you don't even have to do it to like attract people in. You're just sharing because it feels good to share. You're doing it for yourself. And then whoever is meant to receive your medicine will receive your medicine, until you get the confidence to start thinking like, what is it that people might want to hear? And then I can maybe shift that. But my muscle memory feels strong enough to do that now. Like, my nervous system feels okay. And it's like, okay, well, exactly as you said, where can I go next? Can I share it around a fire? Can I share it with my family? Can I share it with a bigger community? Can I? And then it just becomes bigger and bigger. And that expression becomes safer because you've kind of expanded your capacity within your nervous system to hold the potential outcome of what you're sharing, knowing that you can hold that safely. So like with what you just mentioned, with the story that I just shared, like, I journaled on it, I spoke to my partner about it, I mentioned it to a couple of friends, then I mentioned it to my mom, who I was like, didn't really want to share it with to begin with. And then I started to kind of like, the more I shared it, the more I was like, okay, well, no, this is a real thing. Like, yeah, of course I could be scared. Like, I've been persecuted in this lifetime, in my past. I've had anti-Semitic comments made to me. I've had someone arrested for it. Like, this is a real lived experience for me. But I also want to honor and respect like what's going on. I want to honor and respect my inner conflict. And I think like that's been a big shadow that's been released to everyone, of like, okay, well, can we sit with our inner conflicts, and then how can we express that? And it's okay if somebody gets triggered by it, if we can then hold the capacity for that. So it's like, and the reason that most people are scared to share their creative expression is because of judgment and fear. Those are, I guess, the two main reasons why people then wouldn't share, right? So the more that we can kind of attune our nervous system to being able to hold the capacity and then the responsibility of what it means to potentially have someone come back at us, the more, for example, the more followers, quote unquote, I really don't like that word, followers online. I think it's the more people in your community online, let's say, the more potential you have for people to start commenting on things that you say, and they might not agree with everything, and you're going to have to find a way to hold that when that happens, because we're not always going to have like love and adoration, and that's not really what we're here for anyway. So I think it's the capacity, isn't it, for holding the responsibility.
And I've noticed what's helped me in that, and people I've worked with in that, is not seeking that outside yourself. Is how do we resource ourselves with the parts that genuinely care, love, support us, and meet the parts that are scared for whatever reason of the judgment. And it's not belittling that as like, oh, I should just get over it. It's like, no, there was a real valid reason why, for whatever reason, that part's shut down. So it's going either, I mean, for me, it's really helped to be held in that kind of space, and to hold others, is how do we meet those parts within ourselves that really need that holding, where our nervous system freaks out, to meet them with what they need, whether that's simply a hug or to be told that it's okay, or a real strong figure within to just say, I've got you now, you can share, it's safe. And often it's quite simple, but we haven't been taught or learned how to hold ourselves first. And when that becomes stronger, it's like our inner architecture becomes stronger. It's like suddenly I'm safer within myself because I've got myself. And so if something comes from the outside, it can't touch me as much because my validation isn't coming as much from outside. And I still catch myself when I'm like really wanting to be liked by something or someone, and then it doesn't come back, or they don't like it. And it's like, ouch, that hurts. And it's like, okay, how much of me was actually invested in what that person thought of me? Quite a bit in that case. Okay, it's a good indicator. Now, how do I love myself? And how do I show up for myself? I'm experiencing that today, to be honest. Just how do I hold myself and love myself and tell myself it's okay with a situation that's just come up? And so I feel like that's ongoing, isn't it? We're constantly working. It's like every day. It's every day. It's a relationship with ourselves is every day. And cycling back to ceremony, that's where ceremony comes in, especially accompanied by story. It's like, what parts of us need to be loved? What parts of us do we want to embody more? What parts do we want to release and let go of? And ceremony and rituals and ritual action hold such power, and ritual creativity holds such power to transmute and transform. So I feel like it circles. It's almost like an infinity loop, isn't it? Like we express, we put out into the world, we get something back, we have to process it, we use creativity to support our healing, and we express again. And it's like, and it just keeps growing and expanding. And if it's just almost like keep showing up. I think that's what's helped me over the years, is just continuously showing up. And sometimes it feels really hard, and sometimes I've got to retreat. And then I'm like, what's really important? What am I committed to? And then taking the next steps from there. But I think, like you're saying, just practicing showing up feels like one of the most important tools on this path.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's one question that I always like to ask my podcast guests, so I'm going to ask you too, and that is, what does being a liberated woman mean to you?
Loving myself so deeply and truly, and being truly authentic in my expression, and unencumbered and unfiltered, and without inhibition, to be myself in every moment.
Beautiful. I love that. Aho. And may all women feel that in their lifetimes, this lifetime, in past lifetimes, and in all future lifetimes. May we all feel that sense of freedom and liberation to really just be in the truth of who we are and express that into the world. Thank you so much, Samantha. If you want to know more about Samantha's work, you can find all the information in the show notes. I've put her website and her Instagram in there, so you can connect with her if you wish to. You can often find her traveling around doing beautiful storytelling events. I went to a workshop of hers at Medicine Festival, and I know that you'll be doing more workshops, I guess in the UK and probably abroad and in other places. So if you're interested in more of Samantha's work or connecting with her, please feel free to reach out to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Thank you for having me.